Hello and welcome to another Great Shouts Marketing and Growth interview session. I'm Ed Davidson. I'm a fractional head of marketing and your host for these sessions. In this series of chats, we're chatting all about marketing and growth and how it evolves from startup to scale-up level. These are nice warts and all interviews with marketing leaders and business owners who've really done this thing and been through these phases. And hopefully it's really useful for CEOs or founders to get the best perspective for those in the know. Today we've got Tom Dewhurst.
Hello.
Tom cut his teeth with his own tech startup in the hospitality space. He's working with a number of startup advisory boards, and he's gone on to set up a really successful agency that specializes in startups who often get up to that scale-up level and then advance from there. So, Tom, great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. And yeah, it's great to be here. And thanks for the introduction. I think that was, well said.
All right, good stuff. So the question I normally ask to kind of kick things off and give us a little leveler is, how do you define when a startup starts moving to a scale-up phase of its growth?
Yeah, it's a good question. And as you say, we normally work from startup to scale up. So I see that transition happen time and time again. Often, I think it's when, from a growth perspective at least, it transitions from like the founder kind of doing all of the growth activities to kind of hiring a head of marketing or head of growth. And then normally operating more than one channel. So normally when they're a startup, there's like one channel, maybe two that are working for them. Often it's like direct outreach in the B2B space, but then it's like, okay, well, let's take it to this next level, implement more channels, bring in a team. And then normally at that point, the growth becomes more scalable in the sense of you're acquiring customers at a lower cost. So you hopefully hit a bit of an inflection point with the brand and the channels to scale up the growth efforts.
Yeah, makes sense. And do you see the kind of KPIs significantly changing from that kind of startup phase to the scale-up phase? How do you kind of measure the metrics of growth, and what else do you kind of consider? I've often had kind of interesting chats with people on here around North Star metrics, for example.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully you have the North Star metric kind of from earlier on. Like as I said, from when we engage clients, we normally would set a North Star metric from the get-go, and often they already have one. So there's hopefully some overarching kind of targets. I suppose from having been a founder myself, in the early days, they're very kind of engagement-led metrics. Like, is the product market fit stuff? Like, are we getting good engagement with the product? We've got active usage. It's kind of a lot of product-led kind of growth and engagement, and then and things like conversion rates matter a lot at that point, and kind of fixing problems throughout your funnel and trying to really nail that at kind of a small scale. And then I think once you transition to a scale up, I suppose generally you focus a little bit more on the kind of higher level metrics, things like MQLs, SQLs, and growth metrics, let's say. And it's about scaling that kind of model that you've already built at the startup phase. And that's probably the difference that I see most often.
With, say, your CAC, working out cost per acquisition, does that consideration change between kind of startup and a scale up? And do you kind of factor in that kind of CAC payback as well? Obviously, at an early stage with the startup, you don't necessarily know if people are going to churn. You don't know if they're going to come back in terms of repeat purchase. So I suppose at the early stages, it's quite difficult to work out where you're in that position, how much you can spend to acquire a customer.
Yeah, exactly. I think, as I said, there's normally one channel that's working, that's acquiring customers. And so, it's normally quite tricky to kind of really calculate the actual acquisition cost at that stage. It's obviously the founder doing some work. There's loads of people involved. It's not, it's not that trackable as well in general. And as you transition into that scale up phase, you can get better tracking in place. You set up CRMs. You can implement sort of paid channels as well. So your acquisition cost becomes a bit more tangible, and yeah, you can see that back out in terms of revenue and churn as well by channel over time. So, as you scale up, you actually see more, I suppose, churn, generally speaking, and therefore you actually get a much more accurate lifetime value calculation, and therefore, your acquisition cost to lifetime value ratio becomes, more trackable and more relevant, I suppose, to your growth. And yeah, obviously you want to be able to acquire a customer a certain value that makes sense for your lifetime value. So normally that ratio is like 3 to 7. Anything lower than that is you're not going to get the payback, and anything more probably means you should be investing more in your growth and marketing. Yeah, as that kind of calculation becomes more accurate as you scale up, it means you can more confidently acquire customers at a certain cost. And that's often a conversation that's quite scary to have at the founder level. I find that we go through that at the startup founder who hasn't got to that scale up phase, and we're like, well, actually, they have hypothetical metrics around their lifetime value, and they're saying, well, we think we're going to sell this amount in the future, say £20,000 for argument's sake, and you're like, well, actually, that means you could be acquiring a customer for around like 3 or 4,000 quite comfortably, and they're like, wow, that's amazing. I should, what can I do to spend that money and acquire those customers and scale it up? And often they're sort of playing around with like a couple of £100 acquisition costs, and you're thinking, well, actually, if the business model stacks up, you should be investing more in your growth and looking at channels that you can acquire customers for that level of acquisition costs, which is always an exciting conversation to have. Obviously, that's all hypothetical, but it does shift the mindset between startup and scale up.
Yeah, it's fascinating you're saying as well around, like, you lay out, say, there's a cost per acquisition that's available at £3,000 because you can see that, and that maybe would kind of scare the founder. But if you can prove that is the case, then you can say, right, let's pull the trigger and let's move up in terms of start scaling up certain channels.
Exactly.
Yeah. Have you kind of seen any more? Is it more difficult that you've seen over time to track users successfully, where you're spending money and getting returns? I've kind of seen that more recently, especially increasingly like a cookieless world. More seems to come in on, through direct, more seems to come in through kind of untrackable. And so it's more tricky to be able to attribute where the users come from.
100%. Yeah. I mean, technology is advancing so much, but we're still flatlining, if not getting worse, with like attribution and analytics. Obviously, there's other factors around regulation and cookies coming into play, but yeah, it's still a bit of a black box, and something that we're always banging our heads against the wall a little bit with clients, because they always want to see the last touch attribution conversions, and it's like, oh, this channel is doing so well to generate leads and customers, and yeah, probably is, but you've got to appreciate the full funnel and the full marketing channel mix, and more often than not, that's not fully understood. And you've got to look at all of the metrics throughout the funnel in order to kind of complete that picture. So yeah, it is getting harder. We, to be honest, haven't found like a catch-all solution that we put in place. If I'm honest, like every client and every business is different. Every different CRM, different kind of tech stack, and you have to be a little bit adaptable. And also the budgets as well. Sometimes startups come along with they don't want to invest in their kind of their tech stack, and you have to say, well, if you're not going to implement the CRM or invest in setting this all up properly, these are your limitations. And often they don't appreciate that and don't know what they don't know, in the sense of you need to invest all of this to get that insight, which again is a common problem that we see at the startup phase. Again, when you get to scale up, often that investment does get done, and over time they realize, actually we do need that insight. So it becomes a little bit easier, but still fraught with problems as it gets more complicated at the scale up stage.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. So I suppose then drilling down a little bit in kind of channels, then it's interesting you kind of say kind of at that startup level, there's normally like one standout channel that is getting that level of growth. How have you kind of come to that conclusion on that channel? Is it a case of, testing across a whole number of different channels, spaghetti on the wall and sees what sticks? Or is it you've got some insight that one particular channel works, it's going to be that classic 80-20, and that's going to drive the majority of the business?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say it's the spaghetti on the wall because it's a very rigorous experimentation process, Ed. But yeah, we've worked with about 120 startups now, and obviously many of them have gone to Scaleups. So we do see a cross section of business models, of industries, of B2B, B2C. And we have a bit of insight then as to like which channels tend to work and generate results for certain businesses. You know, a lot of them are kind of like them slightly more mature ones. There's still a lot going on in the paid ads, like the Google ads, Facebook ads. You can still make those work. LinkedIn ads increasingly is becoming a channel that we back as a successful lead generator at the startup level. And unfortunately, we do work a lot on the top of the funnel lead generation. I mean, I say unfortunately, it is what it is. People need leads, and yeah, those channels work well. Again, like I said, direct outreach is a classic one over LinkedIn and email for B2B startups, especially. So we use the Bullseye framework, which looks at 20 channels that you can use to market. We've got to put our own spin on that, but we would always do a Bullseye workshop with a new prospect before we even start working with them, to say like, okay, we now understand your business. We ask the short form. Here is the 3 to 6 channel mix that we recommend you test over the next 6 months that will hopefully generate the results that you're looking for and give you the best chances. So we try to avoid just going in with one channel, or even we say 3 is the minimum, mostly because you put all your eggs in one basket if you just do one. And often we see tend to be really early stage startups just back one channel, and it might not work for like 6 months, and then you've wasted 6 months. And so we do really suggest if you can, even if you're going to do it, or like someone needs to be doing like these 3 channels, because then you have a much higher chance of at least one of them sticking and being able to scale up.
Makes sense. Yeah. So when you're testing these channels as well, in terms of message market fit and getting that messaging right, how do you kind of see that playing out? Is there often a message that resonates with initial cohort of customers, those early adopters, and does that messaging need to change and evolve as they move to a scale up while still having a core value that stands for the brand?
Yeah, a good question. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this one as well. But yeah, I mean, it all stems from having a really strong customer understanding. So what we look for is good customer research going into any kind of growth exercise. If it's not in place, can we do it? Often that's where the kind of the gold is finding those nuggets of messaging and positioning. And then it's bringing that into a kind of solid ideal customer persona document. We have like a little matrix that we use to kind of break down the variables, and again trying to keep it to like 1 to 3 customer personas, 1 to 5 maybe max, but you can prioritize those over the 6 months and go and test that. Often at startup level they don't know what their ICP is, so being able to kind of test a couple of ICPs to a couple of messages gives us a good chance of resonating with something that backs out in their business model. But yeah, the scale up stage, normally there is like obviously a successful ICP. You've kind of proved product market fit, and with some messaging obviously there to get that market on board. I don't necessarily think it changes, to be honest with you. In my experience, it's more of a case of doubling down on that message. Normally there's a value proposition statement that works with that ICP at scale up stage, and it's about just finding more of those customers and building more awareness. So it's more about, I suppose, getting that message out through more channels than like shifting the message. At least that's what I've seen. But yeah, can you take your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think the only thing that I would add is that often as you go kind of through that startup stage, there may be a number of pivots, not necessarily complete model pivots, but kind of mini pivots, which sometimes means that kind of the value prop can get a bit lost. And also internally with an organization, it can be a bit lost. And then it's kind of worthwhile just going through a process to be kind of super clear the customers you're going after, if there are any particular segments that are most relevant, and then kind of refining what that value prop in order to be able to like put more time and effort on it and pull the trigger and then kind of grow from there. So I think that's sometimes a quite useful exercise. And kind of, you know, value proposition canvas, something similar to that. Again, looking at kind of gains and pains, just so you're super clear about what pains you're answering. Especially after, you know, those early adopters might be easier to reach initially through particular channels, but it becomes a bit more diluted as you're going out wider. So you need to make sure that it kind of resonates, which is a lot harder to do rather than going through direct response channels where there's that touch with customers. But yeah, can understand it.
And obviously, certain channels, you know, are harder to get that value proposition across. You know, sometimes an ad, for example, has a very small amount of copy that you can use. So, you know, obviously you'll be super focused then with that key message or that key proposition. Whereas, you know, content marketing, you've got a little bit more wiggle room to, you know, to get that message across. So again, it depends on the channel mix that you've got, but hopefully there's a balance between, between the two.
Makes sense. So I suppose in terms of the team, you obviously operate with a number of different consultants or kind of freelancers that you work with, internal teams as well. How do you see the kind of skill set of working with that particular startup that goes to a scale up in terms of in-house people that they use? And are there particular times when your kind of agency channel owners step back as they bring things in-house as well? It's quite an interesting perspective from you kind of working as an agency across that number of businesses.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to acknowledge is as a kind of a growth division, we pull together teams of freelancers and specialists to work on a project. So as I said, almost 3 to 6 specialists that we head up with a fractional CMO, kind of like yourself. And that works quite well because you've got the kind of strategic side of the growth strategist, but also the kind of operational expertise of the specialist. And the reason why we do that was actually from my own experience from Ordu. You know, when I was running that previous tech startup you mentioned, I was trying to do all of it myself at the startup level. I'm relatively young. I was kind of like trying to learn and figure it all out myself, but as soon as I realized I wasn't an expert at all these different things and I couldn't, you know, get the results I was looking for, I turned to kind of bringing in freelancers. And, you know, as soon as I did that and had the resources to do that, it really changed the game for our growth because it meant that, they came with a playbook, they came with experience, and they could just sort of get results. And I was just sort of pulling the strings. And that's what we try to create for other startups now at Growth Division. Obviously, that gets to a point when normally that, you know, we've got some clients who've gone on to raise tens of millions of dollars, like Series A, now Series B. You know, you should build your team internally at that point, but hopefully with the knowledge and understanding and learning that we created to say, like, these are the channels that work, you should go and hire a paid media expert, a content marketer, you know, a head of marketing. You know, you can then build that team with confidence. Because if you do it too early, you know, you hire a paid media specialist, but then all your paid channels flop for whatever reason, you got to fire them or try to repurpose that person. And that's obviously a pain. So in my view, there's like an interim between startup and scale up where you can bring in this sort of more flexible resource, test and learn in these channels, and then hire when the time is right.
Okay, yeah. And do you tend to work or see when people bring in kind of perm marketing or growth leads, as in they are you know, kind of permanent positions at kind of senior level, or is it kind of junior marketing people that rely on agencies together with more senior founder or co-founders that help kind of lead both the in-house and the agencies?
Yeah, so I've not seen the latter really work, so I wouldn't recommend that. I think one of the sort of pain points that we saw with startups was the founder trying to hire really cheaply, which is classic because they haven't got much money. And so they bring in like a junior or even an intern who's even worse. They're like, you go do our, you know, content marketing, you know, and it's just recipe for disaster, in my opinion. Like, nothing against sort of junior young people, but, you know, they haven't got that experience and they don't know what good looks like. And so, you know, often that doesn't work. And then it's like, is it the channel or is it the person that is causing the issue? And you don't know, and you can never know in that scenario. So like from my perspective, if you bring in like an expert and the channel doesn't work, at least you know the channel doesn't work and you can move on and try something new. So yeah, that scenario doesn't work in my opinion. I think, you can obviously hire permanently in the head of growth role, especially if it's sort of an untested environment and you need lots of experiments and more creative experiments as well. I think when you are running like unconventional PR or you're running these kind of like, I don't know, kind of random campaigns, you do need someone kind of internally full time to run it. But often, we can come in a growth division as an agency and, operate kind of more traditional channels like, the paid, the content marketing, SEO, community building, and, as an external resource, operate that with our skill sets internally, skill sets as an agency and freelancers and find, top of the funnel leads for those clients. But I suppose sometimes the challenge that we find is going full funnel. We often, as a growth agency, we do like to look at retention and referral. And that's where I think we would rely on a little bit more capacity at the growth strategist level to be able to run those experiments and be creative throughout the funnel. Because I think that's where generally agencies fall down, and something that we're always trying to improve ourselves as well.
And yeah, these are trying these kind of warts and all interviews. Have you seen it where these channels just haven't worked out and it's less of the channel but more of the business? And how are you kind of providing that kind of level of feedback back to the organization to be able to help them to refine the business overall and the model?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're not magicians, like if we come to a startup, and also 90% of startups fail, as they say. So, we operate in a very uncertain and kind of failure-ridden environment. We have had clients go out of business and not pay us as well. So, we're very cautious around some of this, but we like it. We like that environment. That's why, that's my passion. That's Tristan and the team is really bought into kind of this building startups. So, it's a double-edged sword in that regard. But yeah, often we would go into a client and it doesn't work. And, we obviously do our best to advise why that could be happening. I sometimes take advisory positions and we have a growth advisor role, which if they take seriously and they take our advice, hopefully we can coach them into like what they need and what assets they need and what they need to kind of invest in. We do it obviously in their interest as best as we can. But yeah, fundamentally, the business is struggling. That often it boils down to a lack of customer understanding. They say that they've done all this customer research and they say that this is what the customer wants, and we take that kind of a bit of gospel and we kind of run with it. And that's never kind of reviewed or audited essentially, and we're just sort of banging our heads against the wall because it isn't what the customer wants. There's nothing we can really. No channel is going to make that work. It's just there's no customer demand, and that's unfortunately, what happens now and again. We do our best to overcome that, test different messaging, etc. But if they're not going to go back and do a deep customer deep dive, then you're just going to go around in circles, and there's nothing you can do in that scenario.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it just comes down to that level of customer understanding, doesn't it? And just their jobs to be done in terms of meeting those particular pain points, and kind of understanding if that progresses as you start to scale up as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and again, hopefully looking at this kind of scale up piece here, as you do come slightly later at the startup and scale up stage, that's less of a risk, I think, because there is results, there is learning, there's customer needs. So at that point, if something's not working, again, you just got to look at the numbers to say like it's not backing out in terms of revenue. It's super important to have the analytics set up at that point though, to know that, because as I said, like there's multiple factors around attribution, and you've got to be really clear on like what the channel's objective is, because it might be a top of the funnel channel, that's just there to raise awareness, and then if you're then sort of judging it against lead generation, for example, it's not going to compare to paid ads, for example. So you're just going to be super clear on like your full funnel, what the metrics are, like what the strategy is, and obviously it still might fail at raising brand awareness, but it's a slightly different objective at that point.
And are there any kind of processes that you think need to be locked down before it moves on from a startup to a scale up? I'm kind of thinking the classic example of that friction between sales and marketing, for example. And when a lead is generated, is it a baton that's passed across as opposed to marketing working across the whole process and being targeted on sales velocity as much as their own kind of lead gen? Are there certain things that need to be kind of agreed before they move on to a kind of scale up part of the growth?
Yeah, well, as I was saying, kind of like the metrics you start to track at the scale up is more kind of like MQLs, SQLs. So you need to have those like really well defined and tracked, ideally in a kind of CRM, obviously, and kind of have that merging between sales and marketing, and there's a clear kind of handoff of objectives. We work in as a kind of more agency focused environment to kind of hand over the leads, but I know like slightly different organizations will work more collaboratively. But again, as I said, like we like to work at full funnel, and that's where CRMs do really kind of useful. We get access, we can like look at how do we optimize kind of returning customers and referrals and that sort of thing. But yeah, it is super important to get that CRM process set up properly. And we always advocate, well, not always, but where we can, we do advocate for better sort of sales and marketing operations, and making sure that someone is responsible for tracking all of that and kind of managing that process. So that's important. I think, the only other thing that I like to see and we like to put in place is still that experimentation mindset. We have our own little tool where we kind of track all of our experiments. It is AI powered, where it kind of brings in sort of information and learning from our other successful experiments, and so says like it generates ideas for a specific client to say like this is what you should try within this channel, and then it builds it out to an experiment so that it gives a bit of guidance as what to run and what metrics to track. So that mindset should carry on through startup to scale up, and as we just said, it's a very uncertain environment. So having that mindset of like 50% of this might fail, but 50% would be amazing if that works, and we can kind of systematize those successful experiments, compound growth, and that's generally how I see kind of companies build growth over time, is those sort of little wins that compound and they can systematize, rather than the kind of like silver bullet growth hack that does exist and we've seen it happen, we've made it happen, but it's something you can't really rely on.
Makes sense. Okay, look, we're nearly at time here. Thank you so much, Tom. There's been so much useful information out of it. The final question I tend to ask is, what's the kind of best piece of advice, if you've got it, for recommended to a founder or a CEO that's going through that growing pain process from a startup into a scale up?
Yeah, I think it would still be related to keep the feedback loop coming from customers. I'm guilty of it. Everyone is. And I think, sometimes it's hard to take your own advice, but, keep talking to customers, at least if it's like once a week, just having some sort of systematized loop to keep on top of like customer insights. And, that's the founder in me speaking, because I think there's always something to glean from that. Even if you're having to just listen to like sales calls or customer service calls, just having that touch point with a customer throughout that whole journey is vital, in my opinion, and just solves a lot of problems. You always go back to like, is this what the customer is asking for? So that would probably be the key nugget.
Makes sense.
Today.
Well, Tom, thank you so much. It's been great having you on. Thank you, everyone, and I'll see you in the next session.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks for inviting me, and I enjoyed it.
Good stuff. Bye now.
Bye.